This is Elizabeth. We are continuing to get ready for our review of the book of Proverbs. So I wanted to give you a little bit more information about King Solomon, his father, King David, and his mother, Queen Bathsheba, all right? But before I get there, I just wanted to share a couple of things. One is that personally, right, when I love a book that I've read, a movie that I've seen, just when something really captivates me, whether it's, just greatness or, some really dark things. But I like to really find out like what's behind that person that wrote that great book, that person that directed that movie. I'm just my personal, I guess, quirk is like, who influenced that person? Where were they born? Who was their mom and dad? Because I know all of those things play in what they wrote, right? And so that's what I wanted to share with you, the background of King Solomon, his dad, his mom, how he grew up, because all of those influence him in the books that he wrote, right? Another point is that well, King Solomon's life took some unexpected turns, and some may be quick to dismiss him and dismiss his writing, questioning like, why should we even pay attention to a man that seemingly ended his life as a failure? So, however, what I want to share is like, hey, let's truly learn from someone that went really, really, really high, had very great success and then ended up a little kind of, not as great. We can learn his do's and his don'ts, right? So his life is a powerful testimony to the consequences of either following or neglecting God's instruction. And in regards to King Solomon, in essence, he veered off the path of his own wisdom. He stopped practicing what he preached. And this is something that we see throughout all history, right? So his life story serves as a reminder that even as devoted followers of Jesus, we are humans and we are flawed and we're going to make mistakes, right? So we can't just dismiss someone when they've made mistakes, right? God's grace extends to all of us. So regardless of our past, regardless of what we do, when we come to him, God gives us grace and he forgives us. But if you just take a peek right into the Bible, you'll find all of these saints, faithful ones, that had tons of imperfection. I mean, monumental things, and God still used them. So I just want to share that because there is, this notion that, hey, King Solomon was great, but then he kind of messed up things, so let's dismiss him. So I'm saying let's learn from the great mistake, the great things that he did, and then his mistakes. All right. So with that said, let's start learning about his family background. So King David is the father of King Solomon. And King David was born to Jesse, and I think he was like the youngest of 8. And when David was really, really young, a prophet Samuel came around looking to anoint the next king. And he went to Jesse and said, hey, I think it's one of your sons. And he met all his sons and he's like, no, there's got to be another one. It's like, yes, we have another son, but it's David and he's out with, the sheep. And he's like, bring him to me. And he brought him and he realized that David was going to be the next king. It took a while before David became king. But as a shepherd, he learned so many things, but his relationship with God grew. He had a really strong relationship with God. He loved God. So he is skilled warrior. It's interesting because he also played the harp, which is, very sort of feminine in a way, angelic, but he's a warrior. He's also a musician. He wrote the book of Psalms. So we get to see a lot of his emotions. So very interesting man, but he loved God. And I know you know the story of the giant Goliath, but just gives you a glimpse that he was really young and he was so offended by this giant that mocked God. And so he went out and said, hey, God has given me the skills, he's given you to me, and he kills him. He kills him out of like disdain and love for God. So that just shows you at a very young age how much King David loved God. He had a lot of flaws, like we all do. there was moments in his life that he failed to honor God, leading him to dramatic and sorrowful circumstances. I mean, some crazy, crazy things happened in his family dynamics. Very sad. And one of those failures was his affair with Bathsheba. So Bathsheba was the wife of one of King David's top generals, Uriah. King David saw this lovely woman. He was like, whoa, who is she? And they told her, hey, she is married. And he didn't care. He had an affair with her. She was pregnant. And so now King David is trying to hide his sin, and it doesn't work. So sadly, he goes to the great lengths of arranging for Uriah, or Bathsheba's husband, to be killed in battle. So it looks like he was killed in battle. That child that was born from adultery did not survive, and God told him that he would not survive. King David did marry Bathsheba, so now under that marriage covenant, their second child was Solomon. Solomon was favored by God, and he was also a significant figure in the lineage of Jesus Christ. So both in Samuel and in Chronicles, it says that Solomon was favored by God and seen as beloved to Jehovah. So already I'm sharing you with this because now there is this affinity when you feel loved. Who do you become? What type of person do you become when you feel loved by your mom and dad, and you know through these prophets that God has favored you, right? So I'm just giving you that background. So King David, like I mentioned, he's a warrior, he's strong, barbaric, he loves God, and his dream is to rebuild the temple of God. However, in Chronicles, through a prophecy, it's made clear to David that he would not be the one to rebuild the temple, that it would be his son Solomon, and that Solomon would bring peace. Solomon, as you remember, is going to be more chill. He's going to bring peace to Israel during his reign. So then David knows that Solomon is going to be the king, and what his trajectory and his big projects will be. So knowing this, right, even though King David faces some really crazy things, he loves God. He loves Solomon. He wants to prepare Solomon. So he imparts to Solomon tons of wisdom, all the wisdom that he has. And you see the wisdom that King David has through the Psalms. And I believe Proverbs 4, which we'll review it, is where King Solomon is sharing what King David has shared with him, right? So you see the heart of David trying to impart all of the wisdom to his son, telling him the importance of wisdom, of understanding, staying true to God, and seeking him with all of his heart, making wisdom, making God number one in his priority. Also, Solomon's mother is giving him advice in his youth about staying away from women, staying away from this, staying away from that, and honoring God no matter what, keeping God in the center of his life. So I share this again to show you that Solomon has a mother that is telling him the importance of his relationship with God and wisdom, and he has a father that is telling him again about wisdom and keeping God number one. All of, you can imagine everything that David has gone through by this time, and he's sharing all of this with King Solomon. So as King Solomon ascends to the throne, like I'd mentioned before, God appears to him in a dream and asks him, hey, I will give you anything you want. What do you want? And King Solomon actually says, you have been good to my father, and so I humbly request, and it's interesting, he actually requests a discerning heart, so I can govern the people and distinguish from right and wrong, a discerning heart. God was pleased with Solomon's request and not only granted him wisdom, but also bestowed upon him wealth, honor, favor. So So this shares with you, right, how King Solomon already had this like propensity to love wisdom. His parents taught him to look for it, to love wisdom. So like I said, that verse says, give me a discerning heart to distinguish from right and wrong. So if we go a little bit deeper, the Hebrew word for that, those words, discerning heart, is to hear intelligently. And so there was a time when King Solomon can hear intelligently. And we have some examples of how he governed, that story about the baby, two moms, there's two moms and there's one baby and they're both saying it's my baby. And then he says, all right, let's cut the baby in half. And so you know that the real mom would say, no, 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 forget it. Give her the baby. She would do whatever to save her son, her child. So it just gives you a glimpse of the type of wisdom. And then, like I shared, that people from all over the world would come to listen to him. So during his reign, Solomon demonstrated wisdom and understanding that surpassed everybody that lived in the East, everybody that lived in the West. He embarked on these major projects, negotiating, strategizing, to keep his kingdom at safe and at peace. So then you have people saying, oh my goodness, this place is at such a peace that even the servants are happy, right? And that's when you know that you have a good leader, when people in the bottom, people in the top, they're all the same and they're all happy, well-fed, tons of money everywhere, and safe and happy. However, as we know, that history reveals that Solomon's obedience didn't last. So despite what his mother had told him about staying away from, getting entangled with certain women and not drinking and everything that his father shared, Solomon chose to ignore their counsel. He started indulgently, he just indulged in wine, and he amassed was over 700 wives. How can you do that? I don't know. 300 concubines. But just a little FYI is like, why would he do that? It's not that he was, it's a little crazy, but he did a lot of it to have strategic relationships with different countries. So instead of focusing on God giving him peace at that time, he said, oh, let me marry princes of this so we can have peace with that country and peace with this country. So marrying these queens and these princesses for strategic political purposes. So what happened is described in 1 Kings 11 is that when Solomon grew old, his wives led his once devoted heart astray towards other gods, causing him that unwavering devotion to the Lord to waver. And it's interesting, right? That this was so different than how God describes David. God talks to Solomon and says, hey, because you have veered away, you have disobeyed, I'm going to take your kingdom away. Because you're not like your father that stayed steady, but because of your father, King David, I am going to wait and give you grace until you die. So you won't see all this destruction. But it's interesting that David, being a murderer and an adulterer and all sorts of stuff, that God still gave him grace and he still saw him favorably. And the reason is because even though David did all sorts of stuff, if you read the book of Psalms, he always goes back to God. He hid for a little bit, with all that affair situation, but then he went back and he said, forgive me. So he always goes back. So just a reminder, it doesn't matter what we do, that we just go back to God. He will give us another opportunity. He loves us and will forgive us. And Solomon, because of the women that he started marrying that were pagans, they turned his heart and he left God and he started actually worshiping other gods, and it left him to a very sad life. So that's what we can learn from him. What happened when he was obeying God, and what happened when he was disobeying God, which is um one of the important principles in the Christian life is being equally yoked. We have to be careful. In this case, these women turned him away from God. So the people around you, are they helping you get closer to God or away from God, right? So King Solomon also wrote the book of Ecclesiastic, and he wrote that a little later in life. And it seemed like, yeah, later in life, he was a little bit more jaded. So if you get a chance, read the book of Ecclesiastic. It's written as sort of like a reflection of how he was relentlessly pursuing satisfaction outside of God and how it was a waste of time. He also penned the Song of Solomon. I like the Song of Solomon. It's very poetic. It's very romantic. It talks about the nuances of courtship, that initial courtship when you're just getting to know each other, so excited, marriage, the mystery and the sanctity of the union of two souls coming together. And it's also a representation of the relationship between Christ and his bride. So I wanted to give you that background, so when we start reading the chapters, you understand where King Solomon's coming from and all the characters. All right. So I hope you enjoyed it, and let's continue on our journey here.